Hello and welcome back everyone to Blender Geometry Nodes workshop for Jungle Vines. In the last lesson, we created ourselves a neutral type of density for any mesh. So now we'll be able to make use out of a pathfinder. But before doing that, we actually need to make use out of a simple starter point so we can determine where the vines would grow from, for example. So for us to do that, we're going to go on to make sure that we are within object mode. We're going to go ahead and click Shift and A within our viewport. Make sure you're hovering over the viewport, by the way, otherwise it's exactly reliant on the position of a mouse. If we were to hover over the geometry nodes and click Shift and A, it's going to create a geometry node over here. But if I were to hover over in the viewport, click Shift and A, it's going to create an asset within the viewport itself. So that's important. And we're going to hover over empty. We're going to click on either one of those. And personally, I'm just going to select a sphere since it's nicely visible like so. We're going to get ourselves an empty object, which is basically not going to be visible whilst rendering, but it helps us to visualize, for example, the location of this object over here. I'm going to make it smaller as well. I'm going to go ahead and click an S just to scale it down like so. I think that's good enough. And we have ourselves the empty. Now you can see that the geometry node itself disappeared because the geometry node that we had was actually on this object over here. So by simply clicking back on this object, we're going to go back onto the vines and we're going to see the vines again. And actually one more thing that I need to say is if you want to move around the objects and assets, the node itself, you can select on one of them. You can click G and you can just simply move it like so. If you want to, for example, turn the line and reroute it, you can hold Control and you can just simply drag it outside like so. By releasing it, you're going to be releasing the value itself. You're going to remove the line, and by simply clicking and holding from this value over here, you can reroute it like so. So in case you make mistake by having a different section, a different float value attached, just make sure to reroute it like so. All right, so now that we have ourselves an empty object, we're actually going to make use out of the parameters. We're going to open ourselves this area over here. We can click on this arrow over here, or alternatively, as a shortcut, we can click a letter N. So this will allow you to basically open up and close these values. Throughout the lessons, if you're getting mixed up with the shortcuts, just have a look at the left-hand side of the video and you can see all of the shortcuts being used up over here. The only thing that I will say is that I often use F8. So if you see F8, it's just simply me pausing the video. So ignore that shortcut. But every other shortcut is going to be basically used for me to just simply move around and whatnot within the Blender project. So again, by clicking N, I'm going to open ourselves up with this interface, and make sure you have group selected tab over here. If you're not seeing the group tab, just make sure you scroll up like so to see it whilst having the mouse in this area. So like so, having the group selected, you're going to get yourself an interface, and by clicking add new item, we're going to get ourselves a new inputs selection. So let's go ahead and select input like so. Now have the object disappeared entirely. The reason being is that it's not sure what to do with the socket. So we're going to make sure that we change the type for starters from float. We're going to change it to a geometry. And actually, I just realized that we also need to move this downwards. So let's go ahead and do that. The reason being is that it needs to actually start all of the interface inputs. It needs to go after the geometry value over here. So let's go ahead and drag this downwards like so. And it's going to give us back the mesh. So now we're going to go ahead and select the socket. We need to make sure that we're using the object, the empty that we have. So we're going to firstly change the type from float. As you can see that it has also a color feedback, basically color coding. So gray will be set for float, but if we change this float from float to an object like so, this will turn orange. And then we have ourselves an object that we can set it up with. So we're going to make use out of the empty over here. We can simply click on this pipette and we can select object empty like so. And then we're going to get it over here like so. What's nice about it is also that if we do select the empty and we decide to change the name, we can go ahead and do that. So for example, we can call this something like start empty, like so. Now we can go back onto the object and you'll see that it actually has the renamed default over here. So that's quite nice thing to have. We'll also change the socket name itself. So we wouldn't just have the name set as socket. We will have a bit of a different name, especially over here. If you look at the geometry node itself, we can see that it has a selection and yeah, it doesn't say anything other than socket. So for us to change that, we can just double click on the name over here on the interface. We can call this start empty, like so, and this will change it over here as well. Now, for some reason, when we change the default, we don't get a change in the geometry node over here unless we restart the geometry node itself, which we don't really need to do that. So we're just going to go ahead and also select an object from here as well, just to make sure that the main setup is being used. But basically, whenever we create a geometry node and we select the geometry node, because we selected this as default, it'll automatically try to find this object. But if there is no object like that, then it's just going to be simply set as empty and you'll need to manually select it. Now, to actually make use out of this point over here, we're going to finally get ourselves the setup from group input. But we're often going to be using a lot of different parameters, and just using it from one point is going to be extremely difficult. So what I recommend you doing is I recommend you to creating new group inputs, especially when we go further away. So for example, we want to work a little bit further over here. So for us to do that, we're going to grab the parameter, a new parameter from group inputs. We can click Shift and A. We can search for group input. So this one over here is going to be your first option. We can create a new one basically. And then we're going to grab object info. So we need to find its location of this empty. We're going to drag it out outside like so. We're going to get ourselves relative information to what we can select from this input. So we're going to select object info like so. This will give us this node like so. Then we're going to get ourselves the location. And we're going to select an index, a type of choice from this location. I'm also going to select group output and put it all the way in the back like so. Just like that. So again, selecting it, clicking G, we can move it outside like so. Then the location, we're going to select it using an index selection. So we're going to sample the nearest option over here. So we're going to hit Shift and A, search for sample nearest, like so. And we can put it over here. We can sample the position and we're going to get ourselves the closest position to this object over here. And we're going to make use out of the volume that we have set ourselves up from the volume to mesh. The reason being is, again, we need to have a neutral density mesh. So we're going to go ahead and make use out of that instead of the original mesh that we had. So now that we have ourselves this kind of a setup, we can actually visualize how this looks like by getting ourselves an index. So index is basically a type of selection. And if we search for index like so, we can find ourselves this type of a node, which allows you to basically select vertices within the mesh, basically. So for us to make use out of index, we need to search for, if we click Shift and A, we need to search for equal. And actually, by dragging this from index itself, if we search for index equal, like so, we can grab ourselves this node. Now, if we attach this to A and B, basically sample nearest to B and getting ourselves equal like so, we're going to get ourselves the exact point where they intersect, basically the exact index point of the vertex closest to our empty object. To visualize this, we can select the equal. We can click and hold Control and Shift and just use our left mouse button like so. And we're going to get ourselves this. The reason being is, sorry, we're not going to see the setup itself. The reason being is that we need to grab ourselves the viewer from the volume mesh. So it's a bit more advanced. So we're going to click and hold Control and Shift, tap on the volume mesh to get this. and this will give us the value from the equal area. So basically what we did is we selected the volume to mesh, clicking Control and Shift, grabbing ourselves the viewer, which is going to be exactly as the group output at the moment. Then we can go ahead and click and hold Control and Shift again and tapping on equal, and this will give us the value. So we're getting geometry from the volume to mesh and we're getting the value from equal. And then we'll be able to see this small white dot over here. By moving this empty object over here, we can go back onto it. We can select this and we're going to be able to see that it's actually over here now. So yeah, that's pretty much it in regards to that. Again, if you're not able to make use out of the geometry nodes, if you're not able to make use out of the viewer or any of the shortcuts, just make sure you go to edit mode, preferences, and you have the add-on selected for the Node Wrangler. So this is very important to make use out of, especially since most of the shortcuts within Geometry Node will not work as for the things like cleanup and whatnot. You will not be able to make use out of them. So just make sure you have this enabled. You'll be able to make use out of the shortcuts that I'm using over here. So yeah, that's going to be it for this video. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll be seeing you in a bit.